Hey, it's Irish Heritage Month, and I'm celebrating with a little history. In our last exciting episode, I shared with you a few Irish traits, mostly born of the Irish-American experience. And just as promised, this week, I'd like to share with you a more personal story. The Irish-born politician and writer Edmund Burke wrote that people will not look forward to prosperity who never look backward to their ancestors. Our father was a proud Irishman, as was his father and on and on. As a small child, while I was still required to bathe with my sister, I can recall our dad singing Irish folk songs as he washed our hair. Our mother delighted in playing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling on the piano when her husband needed cheering up. Yes, in America, everybody wants to be Irish on St. Patrick's Day. Except my sister, apparently. Some time ago, she took one of those genetic tests where you collect your own body fluid and mail it to a bunch of people with test tubes and white coats. It's a process very similar to Cologuard, but probably not so intimidating. Celebrating St. Patrick's Day last year with our family and my sister, Elizabeth Kelley, Doctor of Jurisprudence, chose the occasion to shamefully announce the results of her test. The conclusion? She's only 22% Irish. It was an outrage. The researchers also sent her a picture of what is supposed to be our family crest, consisting of 3 leprechauns with the letter X representing their eyes hanging from a Gaelic cross on a green tweed background. It was an outrage. The real story of my Irish ancestry, as far as I understand, is one of hardship and suffering, of opportunities and riches, of ghosts, and yes, probably there's a leprechaun in there somewhere. Much of Ireland's troubles and the Kelley opportunities go all the way back to 1690 when 2 feuding rulers brought their armies together on opposing riverbanks to fight for the crown. One of these men was Catholic and the other Protestant. Not that religion mattered, other than that the Protestants just didn't want the Catholics in charge. And that all started a century earlier when a priest named Martin Luther nailed 95 theses to the door of the church. The church was, among other corrupt business practices that would today rival the Trump Foundation, selling tickets to heaven in the form of prayer inducements. Reverend Luther had read his Bible a time or two, and since he could find no such scheme ever suggested by anybody of authority, he took exception and started up his own church. Up until then, Catholicism had been your only option if you believed in Jesus. The Protestant riverbank victory of 1690 not only shaped the modern history of Ireland, but sent more than 250,000 people booking cruises in North America. The Protestants, mostly English, wasted no time in passing laws which closed Catholic schools and prohibited Protestants and Catholics from marrying. Catholics were forbidden to buy land or to expand their farms, and when they died, their property, which was double taxed, had to be equally divided among each of the sons. The farms got smaller and were unable to sustain themselves. People lived mostly off potatoes, which also became the island's chief export. That wasn't too bad. Potatoes were cheap and satisfying and came with a few health benefits. But then a blight ruined the potato crop in 1847, known in Irish history as Black 47. Thousands of people starved in the streets. You've probably heard about the potato famine. It was a lot worse than you heard. It was known in Irish history simply as the Great Hunger. The Irish don't like to complain, but after the Catholics were run off their farms, more than 1 million people died of starvation, dysentery, typhus, and pneumonia. While Catholics were being evicted from their farms and starving in the streets, the British continued to export beef, dairy products, and vegetables. To avoid dying, several million Irish found a way out. They came to America. The Kelleys were among them. We can't be certain about the correct spelling of our last name. Kelley is typically the way the northern, heavily English-influenced Irish Protestants spelled their name. But Catholics, usually those immigrating from the southern counties, kept it simple, Kelley. Our ancestors were Catholic. The second E may have been added by an overworked immigration official, or maybe our ancestors just weren't sure how to spell their name. Either way, a rose is a rose, right? Tedious and exhaustive research compiled by my sister, Libby Kelley Searsniak, Doctor of Jurisprudence, in cooperation with one of the owners of the Goelitz Candy Company, has unearthed some startling facts about our family history. My dad used to receive a gift of candy corn from the Goelitz gang at Christmas time every year. A jar on our mother's dry sink in the family room of our modest, decidedly middle-class home was always fully stocked with the orange, yellow, and white molar-shaped confections. Our father never had any money to invest in the stock market, but somehow he'd acquired a few shares of Goelitz. Outside of our house, Goelitz didn't really become a household word until Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980. The president was known to keep a dish of Goelitz jelly beans on his desk in the Oval Office. The candy became very popular among Republican politicians and are even featured in the closing scenes of the 1990 blockbuster movie, The Hunt for Red October. Given the nature of things, I'm fairly certain that our father had sold his shares in Goelitz long before they were worth much. I can only surmise this because I don't ever remember having any Jelly Bellies around the house. But I'm jumping ahead. The Kelleys fled from starvation and discrimination in Ireland. They became part of a flotilla of converted cargo ships. Some had been used in the past to transport slaves from Africa, and my hungry, sick ancestors, who may have spent everything they had left for the trip, were treated little better than freight on a 3,000-mile journey that lasted at least 4 weeks. Herded like livestock in dark, cramped quarters, the Irish passengers lacked sufficient food and clean water. They choked on the stench. They were showered by excrement and vomit. Disease and death clung to the reeking vessels like barnacles, and nearly a quarter of the passengers aboard the aptly named coffin ships in 1847 never reached their destinations. Their bodies were wrapped in cloths, weighted down, and tossed overboard. Although tired and poor, my great-great-great-grandfather did not arrive in America yearning to breathe free. He was just hungry and needed to eat. But there were a few obstacles standing between him and a meal. He was poor and unskilled, and even worse, he was Catholic. Making his way into Pennsylvania, Thomas Kelley encountered anti-Catholic, anti-Irish mobs in Philadelphia. Homes and churches were being burned in what became known as the Deadly Bible Riots of 1844. New York Archbishop Dagger John Hughes responded by building a wall of his own around Old St. Patrick Cathedral in order to protect it from the native-born population, and he stationed musket-wielding members of the ancient order of Hibernians to guard the city's churches. We'll talk about them a little later on. Thomas Patrick Kelley, or perhaps Patrick Thomas, records are a little difficult to decipher of that era, was born in Ireland about 1812. He came to America and settled near St. Clair, Pennsylvania. The precise date is unknown, but the earliest inhabitants arrived in the 1830s. He married a local girl, Margaret. In the 1850 census record of St. Clair, Pennsylvania, the family name is recorded with just one E, Kelley. Children are listed as William, Peter, James, Michael, John, and Edward. The population of St. Clair was comprised mostly of British, German, and Irish immigrants looking for steady work in the region's rich coal mines and their associated industries. While many of the German immigrants brought industrial experience with them, they were useful in the operation of mines, lumber yards, and ironworks. The Irish families were fresh off the farm. Many of them had to be forced from their land after the British landlords turned their fields into pasture for English cattle. They made space for the animals by starving and then evicting their human tenants. After arriving in America, most paying for passage as indentured servants, the impoverished Irish immigrants often ended up working in dangerous and low-skill manual labor jobs in Pennsylvania, mostly in the mines. According to census records, Thomas worked as a boatman on the Erie Canal. The Kelley family was nearly wiped out in America when all 7 of his sons volunteered with the 116th Regiment, Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, the Fighting Irish, which according to Wikipedia recruited from the Irish Americans during the Civil War. At the end of August 1862, the regiment was ordered to report to Washington, D.C., and was assigned to the Irish Brigade, officially known as the 2nd Brigade, 1st Division, 2 Corps, Army of the Potomac. The Irish Brigade fought valiantly at the Battle of Fredericksburg. The regiment lost so many men that it was consolidated into a battalion. By the time of the Confederate surrender in April 1865, and after nearly 3 years of combat, the regiment was deactivated and the surviving soldiers went home. One of the Kelley boys, my great-great-grandfather Peter, had been wounded and then captured by the Confederates. He would suffer with his wounds and the consequences of confinement in Andersonville prison until his death in 1881. 3 of the Kelley boys had been killed in direct combat. 2 of Peter's brothers sustained injuries, which contributed to early deaths, while another, Captain William Kelley, made it home in one whole piece. He settled in Pittsburgh after the war. Peter went to work for a railroad serving the coal industries and married Mary Ann Broderick. She gave him a daughter and 2 sons, one of whom they named after his uncle, Peter's brother William, my great-great-grandfather. Mary Ann died in 1888 while young William was only 2 years old. The children were split up to live with various relatives, and at age 12, William went to work in the mines to help support himself. After coal was brought up from the mines, it was run through a massive crusher known as the breaker. Colliers, as the coal companies were called, hired young boys and sometimes old men to pick the rocks and slate out of the coal. Breaker boys. The work was all done by hand, dirty and dangerous. It didn't take long before William needed a change. While still working in the mines, he attended a small local college in New Berlin, Pennsylvania, where he met Laura Gross. They married in Williamsport in 1892, but the honeymoon was over when young William abruptly skipped town. It's unclear why he fled Pennsylvania. Maybe he'd sucked in enough coal dust that it was time to seek his fortune out west. Or maybe he was on the run, a hunted man for his involvement with the Molly Maguires. The Mollies were an Irish 19th century secret society active in Ireland, Liverpool, and parts of the eastern United States. They're best known for their activism among Irish American and Irish immigrant coal miners in Pennsylvania. Following a series of crimes, including murder and arson, 20 suspected members of the Molly Maguires were convicted of murder and ceremoniously hanged between 1877 and 78. As with any Irish story, the facts are still debated by at least one historian, but we're certainly not going to allow a few facts to get in the way of a good story, and quite a few Irish folk songs, by the way. For a long time, it was widely believed that the Mollies were a secret branch of the ancient order of Hibernians, which was trying to pass itself off as some sort of Irish aid organization, but is the same group, as you recall, called to defend with muskets St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York against rabid American Protestant patriots. Whatever he had as a reason for fleeing Pennsylvania, my great-grandfather made it only as far as Dayton, Ohio. He was working in a grocery when he went back to Pennsylvania to retrieve his young wife. We're not sure what lured William and Laura across the state line, but within a year, they were living in Richmond. Apparently, he just wasn't suited for the grocery business. In Richmond, William had an opportunity to study law under Judge John L. Roop and was admitted to the Indiana bar in 1896. He immediately opened an office and represented the city of Richmond for 8 years. My grandfather, William H. II, was born 2 years later on April 28, 1898. By this time, the former Irish immigrants had grown to become Irish Americans. The Irish immigrant, despite facing prejudice and discrimination in America, were determined to assimilate and create a new identity for themselves. But they were unwilling to compromise on one aspect of their heritage: their Catholic faith. Now, before we close this podcast today, I am compelled to open a new section that I'm going to call letters. And somebody said, I don't remember who or how long ago, that the art of letter writing was dead, and that's clearly the case, as indicated by these messages I've received on Facebook and via email and what have you. The first is from Martin Stout, CEO of Stout & Son Funeral Homes. We very much enjoyed your wonderful description of Burlington in your last podcast, but you forgot about at least one business. The world would be a better place if you would come see us soon. Well, thank you for that invitation, Marty, and I apologize for overlooking your business in Burlington. There is one of many in the Howard County area, a Stout & Son Funeral Home located in Burlington, right across from the Dollar General store and just up the hill from the Chief Warrant Officer Donald L. Mills Memorial Bridge. Stout & Son, with I think 5 or 6 convenient locations, offers a full line of funeral services, beginning with funeral planning all the way to cremation, and they can even help with burial. They'll even write your obituary if you want them to. So they're a great business. They even sell flooring at their flagship store in Rocheville, right across the street from the subway. And I apologize for overlooking them. The next message we received was from the BBB of B about the same topic or similar. The BBB of B is the Better Business Bureau of Burlington, who writes, "We're writing to complain about your podcast." I knew right then this wasn't going to go well. In describing our progressive town, you falsely stated that the snow biz is closed during the winter. Honestly, sir, we have to wonder if you ever really come into town or just sit out there on the county line stirring up trouble with your writing and that bunch of hooligans you hang around with. Hooligans? For your information, the snow biz is open year-round, at least Wednesdays through Sunday, and now offers, for your convenience of everybody concerned and as an alternative to our other fine dining establishments, selections from Pizza King. We hope that you will correct your former lies and make this right in the eyes of our community. Well, I apologize once again to the community, to the owners and management of the Snow Biz, to the town fathers, to everybody else who was offended by this. And yes, I was wrong. The Snow Biz is open Thursdays at least through Sundays during the winter time, I think from 4 to 8 p.m. As soon as I got this message, it was on a Friday evening, Teresa and I rushed over there and ordered a mushroom, sausage, and pepperoni pizza, and it brought back memories of when Fred was still cutting up pizzas up on Phillip Street. So I wholly recommend this as a dining place, and again, apologize for overlooking their business hours. That's it for today, folks. Until next week, happy St. Patrick's Day.